Welcome to the Sooners 360 Recruiting Podcast, a podcast for OU recruiting fans by Sooners 360. Each week, we catch you up on the latest in OU recruiting news and provide opinions and evaluations on all things OU football recruiting. I'm Chris Mason, lead recruiting analyst for Sooners 360. This is a special episode. I'm joined by my longtime collaborator, Caleb Cummings, a talent evaluator and opinion creator when it comes to OU recruiting and OU football. Caleb, thanks so much for joining me today for this special signing day review episode. This podcast is sponsored by Sooners 360 on Patreon. To support this podcast, please go to patreon.com/Sooners360817 and click subscribe. It's only $2 a month and there's a free trial option. That's where I'm posting all of my recruiting updates. This podcast is now part of the Believe podcast family. Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is episode 111, just simply titled 2025 Class Review. And instead of going to the recruiting news, we're just going to jump into talking about this recruiting class. And Caleb, it's been a little while since I've had you on, so I'm going to give you some space to provide some opinions on what we think of the 2025 class. So let me lead off with a real general, easy question for you. What's just your kind of initial thoughts on this 2025 class?
Incomplete.
Okay. So you
Yeah.
like me, you think we're missing 4 or 5 players in the class?
100%.
At 18, it really needs to be 22, 23.
I do. There's moving parts to that, I suppose, with the new 105-man rule. I don't know how that impacts things, or how the SEC still being at 85, how that impacts things. So, that's kind of all up in the air. And I know Oklahoma's a really young team, and there's the secondary class yet to be signed, right? AKA the portal, the transfers, and what they do there. So, part of that gets bled into the incomplete. But, just looking at the class as a whole, I think, you come out of it and you, for me, you're going you wish you would have got a tight end. It's probably the best tight end class in region that we've seen in a long, long time, maybe ever, right? I think most everybody looks at Braum and Cure, or at least I do. I look at those two guys and you're like, those look like NFL tight ends. You look at Roberts and you think that is a fantastically good looking tight end, the type of guy that probably is going to play as a freshman even at Ohio State, potentially, right? You give him, he's already just in that size and how he's built, and he's thick, and just a little bit of time in the weight room, and he's that guy already. So to miss on those, you're left going what in the world? One, right? And then two, we saw it clear as day in a line of scrimmage league, right? And everybody knows that they are, and everybody, just the way you win. And I hate kind of in some ways using the SEC as a line of scrimmage league. What football is a line of scrimmage game at the highest levels. And you can get away with it not being that way when, you just out-athlete everybody. But again, in the SEC, South Carolina is such a good example, even though maybe some of their skill guys aren't guys everybody's heard of. When you look at them on the hoof, it's those are all tall, long, explosive, lean athletes on the edge, right? So they cover a lot of ground, and you've got to be able to win at the line of scrimmage. And I would have liked to have seen Oklahoma more defensive linemen in this class, both at defensive tackle and particularly, in terms of getting better from a measurables, a height, weight, speed standpoint, right? Those guys that have the traits to win one-on-one, getting more of those guys. It would have been, that's why I say incomplete, because you don't know what might happen with the portal. You hope maybe that there's some things that get filled in there.
So in some of my writings on the Patreon site, I've kind of indicated to me that I felt like the class is missing a true two-way tight end, a big tight end, not someone who is going to need a year or two to put on 20 pounds, 20, 30 pounds. twitchy edge rusher with length, someone similar to Nixon in terms of frame, those sort of trait things you talk about. I wanted a fifth offensive lineman who was sort of a guard tackle combo kind of guy, because I mean, Afalava has a little bit of those traits, but to me, Hollenbeck and obviously Hutton, who's I think is a very good preferred walk-on. I think it's a good addition, but of course, preferred walk-ons are probably just going to end up being scholarship guys in a couple of years. So that's kind of we're not sure how that will shake out. But regardless, I think he's a good addition there. But Hollenbeck and Hutton, neither guy really has the potential to be kind of like a right tackle or flex to right tackle if you needed them. So
Agreed.
I think that's the other guy I would have added. And then obviously, perhaps a third high school wide receiver. So I think those, if you were giving me 4 positions, I think maybe those are the 4 slots I could fill. And if I could find a defensive tackle that I thought was good enough to be in our rotation, then I would probably would be the last position I would look at as well. So I would go from 18 to 25, 23, and then I think the class, to your point, would be complete. I'm kind of hoping, Caleb, that once the portal exits and acquisitions kind of work themselves out from a scholarship numbers standpoint and from a roster standpoint, that OU in January recruiting takes a look at some guys, brings some guys in, kicks the tires on 3 or 4 players. I would also like another linebacker. I just feel like Marcus, we'll get to him a little bit later, but I feel like Marcus James' future is potentially not at linebacker, and he could be at another position of need for OU, but it would leave linebacker then a little short. So, okay, Caleb, what's your number one player that you think the service is? Which I know, based upon our previous conversations and all that, you have strong opinions on. Who's the number one player that you think the services have just kind of missed the boat on, aren't looking at film, and haven't really valued correctly?
Gosh, it's difficult to say because the services are all over the place.
They are,
right?
With this class too. Yeah.
And I can only imagine with this class, like I'm looking at rivals, and to go off rivals, if I try to utilize them, I would probably say the one that jumps out, and I'm wrong a lot when it comes to these guys, but I would say Manny Choice, so Emmanuel Choice. And it's just, and again, maybe there's some recency bias with just seeing the level of guys that are having success and who's having success. But it's been a long time. I mean, very few times actually. Like Oklahoma in the last 20 years, let's actually peel it back because they've not been great the last like 2 or so. But, in the 22, 23 years before that, has a wide receiver lineage that is among some of the best, right, in the country in college football. But during that time, they've not had a lot of prototypical guys, right? I mean, CD is close to prototypical, and he's even a little bit on the lean side. They've just not been a lot of guys where you trot them out and this is potential first-round draft pick type. And when I say that, I'm not saying Manny Choice is potential first-round draft pick, just that from a height, weight, speed standpoint, the guys you see typically NFL teams want to take inside the first round, and the guys that are considered wide receiver 1, they are 6'2 plus, 205 plus pounds, right? And Manny Choice listed like 6'4", 202, runs track from Lancaster, really good film. He's got where a lot of those really big guys and long guys, I think, struggle with dropping their hips and changing direction and decelerating, accelerating, those things. He doesn't seem to have that. Like all athletes these days, athletes are just getting better and better, it seems. He's got some smaller man movement. So, yeah, I mean, I looked at this last night out of curiosity, because of the whole talk of like, will Deion Burks go to the NFL, right? And the number is, in the last 10 drafts, I believe it was 11 players, 11 wide receivers that have measured under 5'10" or under, so under 5'10", even have gone inside of the top 3 rounds of the NFL. Just doesn't happen much. They're just not. They're bountiful and they're not that valuable. Is what that tells you, right? There's a bunch of them and they're not that valuable, so we'll get them later in the
Right.
draft. So yeah, Manny Choice, that would be my pick, right? There's just not a lot of guys that are. He's listed at 6'4". It's a recruiting service. Let's say 6'3". There's not a lot of guys that are running around at a legitimate 6'3" and a legitimate 205 pounds that you can put out there and just run by folks and catch the ball and turn short stuff into get some yak from it. So, and him being a 3-star, I'd put him on that list.
Yeah, I think the guy that I would, and maybe the guy based upon his senior year, where I'm kind of like stunned that they haven't taken into his senior year and his off-season track season more into account is Torrey Blaylock. He's still a 3-star on On3. They have him as like the number. I mean, Rivals has him probably about right. It's like a top 10 running back in the country. But the other services, have him as a low 4 or even a 3-star. And to me, someone who's playing for Atascocita, playing in a heavy territory of high school football talent in that Houston area, playing top teams every week, for him to average over 9 yards per carry, put up as many touchdowns as he has, also be part of the relay team that set the high school 4x100 meter record, and also have posted, legit 10 sub 10 400 meter times, and to just watch him just blow past people in highlights. He's had a couple of 200-yard games. In the playoffs, he had 11 carries for like 160 yards and 5 touchdowns last week in the playoffs. To me, and maybe they will reflect it, but Caleb, to me, that, when Atascocita is like the number 4 team in the country, and they've been playing top competition in that Houston area, that better than anybody. That's not quite your stomping grounds, but you certainly know where all that talent is in the Houston area. And for him to be averaging over 9 yards a carry is just ridiculous. And with his home run speed, and everyone can say, well, is he really that fast? Well, he's 10 400 meter fast, and he's part of a record 100-meter relay team. I think we can go ahead and say his home run speed validated. Okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, he's one of the guys on film that, and it has to do some with that track, his track background, in that he's super proficient in his movements. He's not like everywhere when he's, which it's difficult to be all over the map. If you're running that fast, you've got to be really proficient. He's one of those guys that it looks, and then he doesn't look slow in any way, shape, or form, but it's so smooth that it doesn't look, like, whoa, was the guy Noel Devine forever ago, that, it was probably because his 0 to the 5, he was full speed there. But yeah, Blaylock, he's actually one of my favorite players in the class. And it's and that's that exact reason. One, I think he's bigger. He looks bigger and thicker and more physical than what he's listed at. I've seen some like at 5'10", 175. You see some like 5'11", 190. He looks, I can't think of the kid that's at Notre Dame that is really good this year. Is it same thing?
Jeremiah Love? Is it Jeremiah
Yes.
Love?
Yeah, that's what he reminds me of. And Love's a track and field guy too, right? He looks a lot like, reminds me of Jeremiah Love, just an explosive guy. And I think we all know this, right? And I think a biggest part obviously has been injuries. And that's like probably a whole nother podcast. But
yeah,
Oklahoma at running back the past 2 years has not been very explosive. Even though, Sawchuk was a USA, track and field junior Olympic athlete. I mean, it has been just one soft tissue. That one's amazing. I've said this a bunch, right? Like how a guy goes 4 years of high school, barely misses any games, runs track year round, and the moment he shows up at Norman, he has soft tissue injuries that never allows him to play. But Oklahoma has not looked outside of a few runs by Sawchuk, last year, has not been real explosive at the running back position. And this kid, he adds, so I think some explosive, dynamic ability at the running back position, like home run ability.
I know it may be a little silly, but the fact his dad has NFL running back genes. His dad was an NFL running back, Derek Blaylock, during the Priest Holmes, Kansas City era. I maybe it's silly of me, but I just think you're kind of silly to ignore the fact that maybe this kid is just getting a little, his dad is a strength and conditioning guy, a trainer. So it's like, seems to be doing a really good job with athletes in the Houston area. It just seems kind of silly. Like maybe, from a rankings perspective, hey, apple tree, let's, it's just a little silly. I think it's, to me, when you factor that in as well, it's just, I think, you got to steal DeMarco Murray. I mean, there's lots of opinions on DeMarco, but I do think DeMarco made the right call focusing on Blaylock as the Texas running back to choose, Texas high school running back to choose this year. I mean, we're not talking about his rotation or anything else going on. Lots of opinions there, all valid, but I think DeMarco made a good call choosing Torrey Blaylock from a not very good national running back group or regional running back group. I think Blaylock is underrated from that perspective. So put rankings completely aside and just think about the film you've watched. Who is and it doesn't have to be the highest rated. I'm not talking like the highest rated, but just who's your favorite player in this class, just based on film and just what you see and just kind of like, that guy, I just like what I see.
Elijah Thomas, probably.
Okay.
It seems somewhat easy. I don't know if I should say it seems somewhat easy. I'll tell you who he reminds me of a little bit, and that's Sterling Shepard. And I know Elijah Thomas is much bigger, right?
Yeah.
Shepard was 5'10" and some change, and maybe 100. He was muscled up, maybe 195, 200 pounds. But there's a certain level of, I don't know how to describe this, like anybody that maybe grew up like being like really bullied, or you got into a lot of fights as a kid, like particularly when you're young, I think maybe you understand that in like really highly competitive situations, there's kind of something you can tap into from an intensity level standpoint. Like, hey, like his 100% has an edge to it. Like, gonna play with, there's some ferocity, there's some bite behind that. And when you watch him play, he just plays with that, right? Like there's this,
like every play could be my last play. Like every play could be my last play. Like,
yeah. He's cracking it open and getting the marrow, man. Like he's just, he's getting after it, right? There's a level of intensity. There's none of this, I'll catch it and looks kind of just soft. Like he's not brother-in-law out there, And I think sometimes it just happens all the times with athletes where you get used to going through this, almost looks like a sparring session. It was like, okay, we're all kind of going here about 90%. We get to the playoffs, we'll go 100%. Then there's guys like him where it's like, okay, no, that's the speed, that's the level of intensity. He's going to get after it, and that's what he's going to do. And so, yeah, he's probably my favorite. I know he comes from a small school. And I think, but looking at his body type, how explosive he is, I think he's also really got the potential to play early.
Yeah, my favorite clip of him is still going to be, I'm not sure if you saw it, they were in the playoffs. I think it was 2 weeks ago, and they're playing Bristow, and he took a short pass, and he went 75 yards for the winning touchdown. And you could the Bristow radio guys are just these two good old Oklahoma boys, from Bristow, doing the play-by-play for the high school radio. And you could hear them. The moment he gets the ball, they're like, no, Thomas has the ball. And they're like, and as you said, he just turns it on. He's at 100%, and he just runs for a touchdown. And these poor guys from Bristow are just like, no, 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 no. And they're just like, because they could just tell, right? Like you can just, it's like, you see like tiger, it's just like, that's a tiger out there. Watch it, because he's going to get
Yes.
you. It's like, he's going to get you. It's like, I agree. I think Elijah Thomas is in that Ryan Broyles, Sterling Shepard kind of in-state wide receiver. We got 3 years of him just being a dog, making plays, big plays for OU. I mean, if you think about Sterling Shepard, as a freshman, he was great. That Notre Dame game I went to, where he makes that great catches a pass goes right through the Notre Dame defense to seal that win in South Bend. The Tennessee game, the Baylor game that year, where he catches that Baker pass over the shoulder. Just, did he catch that? How the hell did he catch that? I mean, and I think, Ryan Broyles was similar in that way as well. Just like, okay, how's he doing that? And I think you're right. Elijah Thomas has a lot of those kind of gritty intangibles, if you can see those kind of coming off the film.
There's just I remember seeing like, I know people don't like Urban Meyer, and there's a lot of reasons probably to not like him. But, I remember him talking about like that being the thing that he always recognized in the very best players that he recruited. And he said he would notice it like when they got into mat drills or they got into competing and doing one-on-one or whatever it was, and he always pointed out, I think Michael Thomas was a guy he pointed out, which, I think Michael Thomas physically, a big imposing guy, but he would talk about, for him, he was not the biggest, strongest, fastest. He was not the best athlete they had or anywhere close. Wasn't neither in the wide receiver room or on the team. But he said he was one of the most, fiercest competitors. And that's what he noticed for like his best players on his best teams, but his best players were his best competitors. And that's, I think you just see that, like, again, I think that's what that edge is to me. That edge is there's a level of competitiveness in their play, and yeah.
Okay. Well, I love that. I love that answer. So I'm not going to go with another player, because ever since he got a verbal and I watched his junior film, I was like, holy crap, this guy is he's just electric. It's just something there. So reframe a little bit. Which player do you think is most likely to be a high NFL draft pick if they hit their ceiling? If they hit their ceiling and development, all those boxes hit the right mark.
You know what? I kind of want to give you a rare one. I think everybody's going to look at Fasusi. They're going to look at Foji, right? Because these are
well. Go off the board. Give me another name.
I'll give you a surprise one. I would say Tristan Haynes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and the reason being, right, I actually loved his tape. I haven't watched his senior tape, but like his junior and his sophomore tape, I loved him at receiver. And so, it's one of those deals of 6'2". Right now, he's listed 175 pounds. You would hope he'd be 6'2", 200 pounds in college, right? So 6'2", 200 pounds, and he's got ball skills. Like, those are, again, like it's a measurable league when it comes to
the track and true track speed.
And true track speed. So it's like, okay, like you're just combining, like, okay, here's a guy maybe under the radar a little bit, and he's long armed, right? So long limbs. So even if he's like, oh, he's listed at 6'2", maybe 6'1", that's surprisingly enough, I think people look at like those are the type of corners. Those are the corners that go in the first round. When, again, it goes back to what we were talking about, like the receivers that go in the top 3 rounds are guys that are 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", 200 plus pounds, and you counter that with a corner that's 6'1.5", 200 pounds and can run, and that's the kind of, I think, the top end development runway that you would look at with a guy like Tristan Haynes, and add the ball skills.
Okay, I think if everything developmentally goes right, he clicks. To me, it's C.J. Nixon. I think is a potential elite rush end. His dad's 6'9", 270 pounds, or like 280. Just a massive mountain of a man. And you watch Nixon. He's taller than Miguel Chavis. We know Miguel Chavis is 6'5", right? Because he was measured at the combine at 6'5". So we know Miguel Chavis in socks is 6'5". There's no arguments there. Nixon's 6'6". He's 6'5.5", 6'6". He's 235. His wingspan is ridiculous. And I think his ability to focus on football because he's obviously you watch him on the basketball court and he's explosive, powerful. I mean, he has all of those elite measurables. And I think when you kind of think about all those being finely tuned at defensive end or rush end, I think you've got like a 6'6", 250-pound guy with twitch, explosion, elite wingspan. And, we've always, on this podcast, you've been very consistent talking about traits at certain positions, right? That you need to have. I need my elite brains kind of in the middle of my defense.
Yeah.
But there are certain positions where you just got to have trait guys, right? You got to measure, and we saw that with the South Carolina game, right? They had two trait guys, right? Kennard and Stewart were we saw a lot of that this year in the SEC. Trait defensive ends and defensive tackles, right? I mean, that was the biggest lesson for me. It was like, okay, well, in the Big 12, we'd have like one guy like that, like Will McDonald at Iowa State.
That's
and
right.
maybe one guy, the K-State guy, I'm going to fumble with his name.
Oh, it's a long name, though. Yeah. No, I know. A lot like Will McDonald, though. He was in that 6'3", 6'4", but massively crazy long arms.
And just, so in the Big 12, you'd have like one or two of those guys that we were dealing with, right? But like with our SEC schedule, we saw at least like 8 of those guys this year.
Yes.
I mean,
that's the difference.
That's the difference. When you combine the different teams, we saw about 8 of those guys across, 5 or 6 rosters. So to me, OU, I want another one because I don't like, as we've seen with the offensive line, injuries and development aren't always, 100% processes, right? You got to have multiples of those guys. But if CJ Nixon hits all of his developmental timelines and his ability matches, he's like 6'6", 250 with twitch, explosion, ridiculous wingspan, and I think, you watch. I'm really enjoying watching Nick Benito with the Broncos this year. I'm just wishing we'd had another year of Nick. God, how much better our 22 team would have been with Nick Benito at edge. But you just
watch R. Mason Thomas, and you kind of get an idea of what Nick would look like. But even more production because, again, like you said, it was Big 12 offensive tackles he would have faced.
Yep. So, but I just think that edge rusher, again, it's a little bit like what we project with the future potentially of David Stone and Jaden Jackson, right? If they hit their marks, those are going to be two NFL defensive tackles, right?
Yeah.
Early round defensive tackles. I just think CJ Nixon has that potential to be like an early round defensive end. If we're going to ignore the 2 tackles and go from there, we'll just, that's who I would have. But I do like your pick because Tristan Haynes, the other thing is, and I mentioned in another plug for my Patreon, the Carl Albert guys, I think, are all kind of undervalued because they were so dominant in high school that they barely played. They sat out a lot of games, and they didn't aggregate a lot of stats, right? Because, when you're the Carl Albert quarterback and you can throw to Haynes, Washington, or James, right, and they're all physically faster, bigger, longer than anybody that's covering them, you're spreading the ball around, it's just – and those guys were just blowing everyone out. I think they're undervalued overall just because of how dominant they were in high school, that it's a little bit – I just don't think they're getting their due. So I think you're right with Haynes.
I agree. I think I mentioned this before. There's the linebacker that from Carl Albert that signed to Oklahoma State. His brother is on the basketball team. I mean, he's – same thing. I mean, he was the guy that I was like, I actually really wish Oklahoma would look at him. He's going to need physical development, but he's similar to similar to Marcus James, right? 6'4", 210, twitchy. Those are again, right, particularly like edges. Like on your edges, you want traits. Like you say, like if you've got tackles like Ryan Foje and Fasusi, you counter that with defensive ends like, Stewart at South Carolina. You counter it with 6'5", 275-pound, twitched up ends.
Yeah, it's as you said. I mean, I can deal with a super instinctive, warrior guy at Mike linebacker. Like, all right, he's more instinctive than he is athletic. I mean, obviously I want both traits, but I can deal with that. But at edge, you gotta have you just gotta have those physical traits, or it's just not gonna work. Or at least it's not gonna work in the SEC that we saw this year. I mean, that's the truth there. So, Caleb, to spin it around just in a different way, player most likely you think to impact the Sooners on the field in 2025? And you can go back to some of your previous choices, because I think the two wide receivers are very, very likely choices in this discussion.
Yeah, I would probably say Elijah Thomas.
Okay.
I would probably say Elijah Thomas. I could be wrong on that, and it's funny. Every Oklahoma fan has PTSD. Like you just do from winning a national championship in 2000, because nobody even gets a hang now, to watching teams just get destroyed with injuries for the next 20 years. In some ways, every year you think you've got a chance to compete for it. So all that to say, like manual choice, the fact that Oklahoma hasn't had 6'3", 210-pound prototypes out there that have done those things makes
it's
me
been Malcolm
like,
Kelly's the last big, great wide receiver we had, right?
Yeah, and even he, you look back on it, even he had was it essentially a micro fracture? Like it's whatever it is, right? Like his knee injury got misdiagnosed. It caused all kinds of issues. It caused it to be worse. But yeah, even he had the lower limb extremity issues his junior year. But he's the last guy that I can think of that was the prototypical 6'3", 6'4", 200 plus pounds. That was dominant, hyper productive. The guys Oklahoma's had that have been in that range since then just have not been guys that have hit.
So you think Elijah Thomas is your choice?
Yes, he'd be my choice.
Okay, I'm going to go a little bit differently. So I think cornerback is maybe an area where a freshman could have an impact. And while I like Tristan Haynes, I think the most ready to help cornerback to help in 2025, I think, is Cortland Guillory. Just with his size, his frame, he's 6'1". I think he's about 190, 195 now. He's physical. Just has had a great year, great senior year where he's been playing, special teams, wide receiver. He's scored, I think, like in 5 different ways this year so far. Again, he's like the Houston area player of the year, according to one publication, and the talent in that area. Texas really tried to steal him, really wanted to steal him, and actually, has, even though I think they would have wanted to flip him, even though they were looking at top 100 cornerbacks as well. They would have taken him, I think, over some of those guys. I think not sure what's going on with Gentry Williams, and I'm not want to get in any more injury discussion on this. I don't, I think we all know he has shoulder problems, and I think we all hope with his talent that somehow that can get resolved. But with Jacoby Johnson, whatever that wide receiver thing, not quite working, and with no other cornerbacks really having stepped up, and not knowing what's coming from the portal at cornerback, because I think that's a major target for OU. I think Cortland Guillory, with just his physicality, makes a great complement to Eli Bowen. You've got Eli on one side, and then you've got a 6'1", sort of 200-pound corner on the other side. I think that duo with the safeties OU has, and the coverage ability that they've got at safety, and the athleticism they've got at safety with the young guys and with what they have returning, I think Guillory could make an impact at cornerback earlier than folks imagine.
I agree. He's one of my favorite guys, just in terms of when you ask like uh, certain guys I like. He's real physical. He's kind of a dick out there a little bit,
Well, you
and
like that. You want
I
those on you want those guys on defense, right?
I like guys that like this is like how I played. Like everything was personal. You
right.
know what I mean? Like this was a personal confrontation between like me and essentially 11 other people, right? I like you like guys like that. Like this is personal. Like if you think you're tougher than me, I'm just mad that I'm generally not happy that you believe that somewhere inside your head. So for the next 60 minutes, it's like my goal is like winning as a byproduct of me proving to you you're not tougher or meaner than I am. And so like he's that type of guy where like when you see him, he can get a shot on somebody, he's taking the shot. Like he's a violent guy. And like fingers crossed, prayers up that his shoulders hold up. Like his joke after seeing Gentry, just every time
Yeah.
he comes flying in for a tackle, something happens. But he is that type of. I mean, he's just like the type of corner that is going to excel under Brent Venables and under Jay Valai because of how physical he is. Those types of guys tend to be, and he's long and he's traits. He's got the traits, but he outside of the traits, he definitely seems to have the temperament.
Yeah, he just seems kind of angry on defense. Like I'm not really happy about you getting a yard, and I'm gonna smack you to make sure you don't get like another one. And again, you just watch him making plays. And he just seems to be in the right place at the right time, a little bit like Eli Bowen was in high school. It's just like, he's blocking field goals and he's blocking punts, and he just seems like he's in the right place at the right time to make the right play. It's just sort of like, now is that an intangible thing? Am I just reading too much into like highlights and footage? I don't know, but it just seems like, some of the plays you're making, like, wow, how did he make that play? Like, and how did he know to make that play? Just seems like a big addition for OU. It's a little. I mean, some folks have uprated him, but he's still it's as you said. When I'm going back and I'm looking at On3, at least lists the 4 ranking systems. And On3 has him as like the number 45 cornerback in the country. ESPN, they both have him as a high 3-star, and I'm just like, what do you? How can you be like the Houston area defensive player of the year and tell me there's like 45 guys better than him, right? It just seems weird that way. But it's just, it seems weird. So Caleb, I always have a little bit of this, and I'm going to put an article out on my Patreon about this. Who's the one player, and we're going to try and stick with guys that really were interested in OU, like, I really wish they could have got, X guy. And I'm like, well, he never talked to us. He never listened to you. But a realistic player, who's the one player that got away from OU in this recruiting class that you're kind of like, to me, the one that always bites me was OU had a real chance like in 2000 to get Derek Johnson, the middle linebacker for Texas back in the day. And like thinking about Derek,
like growing up with a Texas booster.
Yeah. And thinking about, Derek Johnson being coached.
Him showing his high school film. Yeah.
Yeah. So seeing him, imagining him being coached by, Venables, teamed with like Lance Mitchell and Teddy Lehman, it's just like, man, why could we have not pulled that off? So who's the one guy in this class that you think you're going to look back and go, damn, why didn't we get him? And maybe you've mentioned tight ends. You can go back there again if you want. But who's the one guy that you're like, man, why didn't we get that guy?
I probably would have to go back to the tight end, because you've given me the guardrails of don't look at guys that never really looked at Oklahoma.
Well, like I'd love OU to have gotten like Elijah Griffin from Georgia, right? 6'5", 280-pound elite D-line, but okay, he never talked to OU, so what's the point?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking like Keelan Russell. It just
that
was like kind of always a head. I don't know if he just committed to Alabama early, which would seem somewhat odd given the staff movement last year.
No, he was with SMU. He was with SMU for the longest time, and they flipped him.
Yeah, so like, a five-star quarterback from Dallas that's going to Alabama, like, and he's a dual threat, and he's prototypical in terms of, 6'4", 285 pound, like that one, like that stinks, it's just in terms of like that. But
That bites.
yeah, but I would probably say like Lincoln Cure,
Yeah.
and it's just I like Desan Braum, maybe close to as much, but I will say like it goes back to like when I watched the twos film, like Braum, super smooth, kind of reminds me of maybe even like a more oh a more fluid Mark Andrews in some regard. Like he's really good. But Lincoln Cure, I mean, he's got some of that. I guess probably a mouthful, I guess, for anybody that's younger because they probably have grown up with Travis Kelsey being the best tight end in the history of the NFL, which for whatever reason, I guess I just don't view it that way. But he's got like there's a bit of an edge that like Kelsey has played with. He's so good in short, in space and finding space. And Lincoln Cure, he looks like he's like cut from the same cloth, just in terms of that temperament we talked about, plays at
Right.
kind of a heightened speed, but he got all the traits in the world. I'd be honest with you, I actually hate that he's going to Kansas State, even for his own career. It just doesn't seem like that it's an offense or a program that's going to feature him or put him both on on the stage in terms of opportunities against competition and in games, but also in a spot where he can truly show, I think, how good of a player he is. He looks like the type of tight end that in 3 years, you're seeing him go in the top 15 of an NFL draft. And just I think he's the type of guy that had Oklahoma been able to sign in Arbuckle's offense or anybody else's, he's the type of guy you could toss out there as a freshman. And I think he's probably going to go catch you 25 balls for 300 or 400 yards.
Yeah, tight end is obviously that's obviously one of the areas. It's you could have chosen Desan Braum or Nate Roberts or Lincoln Cure, and you'd be like, and you'd have a serious argument for any one of them. Obviously, why a lot of OU fans are frustrated with beyond anything else with Joe John Finley. Obviously, the recruiting side of this. I guess the one guy I wish OU had gotten. I use this on my other podcast, so I'll just repeat it. It's the Elijah Melendez kid from Florida.
Oh yeah.
Just as I think a Mike linebacker. We've got a lot of Will guys in the pipeline, I think, but I'm not sure we've got that Mike Dominator Mike linebacker, our next Mike linebacker after whatever happens with Kobe McKenzie and all that.
Marcus James is interesting to me there. Like I think,
yeah, he could be. He could be. He
yeah,
could be.
because to me, like Marcus, he actually, I can see the the potential for like defensive end, in some type of a scheme. But to me, he looks like a type of guy that maybe physically ends up like a Danny Stutzman. 6'4", 245 pounds, and I in some ways still think that like I guess Kip had such a good year, but like I think that would Kip and Danny, right? Danny and Mike, Kip at Will. I think that potentially the Marcus James could be your Mike, and where they get the Will from, in this class maybe not,
but they do. I think James Nest is a Will, maybe. I don't know. It's I also think Nesta could be an edge rusher based upon some of his film. So I don't know.
yeah.
Melendez to me was just this physical Mike linebacker. I loved his film, and I just thought adding a Mike linebacker to this class of his caliber, that was like a chance for Zach Alley to put his first real points on the board from a recruiting standpoint. Like, okay, because linebacker recruiting's been a little all over the place. Just lost Caleb Burns, who I thought would have been a good addition. Lost Christian Jones to Nebraska, which is fine. His entire family bleeds, is bleeding corn. So, that was kind of understandable a little bit when he made his early decision. But Melendez is the guy, like, if you could have gotten him in our system with the linebacker resources we have, I think he could have been a superstar. So
So that's the question for you is because it is for me now that you kind of bring it and bring it to the top there. Is it surprising that a guy like Zach Alley to step in and for Oklahoma to have even the preseason hype around Danny Stutzman and for them to have the success this year that they did at the linebacker position, right? And for Alley to be a young 30-year-old, is it shocking to you that he didn't sign anybody? I mean,
Yes.
because Marcus James is already committed, right? Marcus
Oh
James has
yeah,
been committed
Marcus
for a
James
while,
is
right?
committed for
Yeah.
last September.
That he
It is a little.
that he failed to sign anybody. Like that's actually really surprising.
It is. I think on some level, the perceived youth of the OU linebacker room maybe hurt him in terms of recruiting. But still, I'm a little baffled how we didn't grab a linebacker this year who was really a really good linebacker. How you can't look at what Brent's been doing, his background, Stutzman, Kip Lewis, just the linebackers making play after play for OU this year. Kobe McKenzie looking good. I think Deshaun McCullough, now that if they just leave him at linebacker, that could be a really interesting player next year for OU in terms of someone who has, I think, NFL potential at linebacker. If you just leave him there, let him get a little bigger. Yeah, it's surprising. I will say I'm encouraged by the linebackers starting to show up in Norman for 2026. So maybe it's just maybe it is that relationship piece that is taking a little while to just kick in. And sometimes that's, guys sometimes struggle their first year, not all of them. Sometimes they do, and then year two, they hit it. I've seen that in recruiting. Obviously, the NIL and portal stuff makes things a little bit more complicated.
That's
But
interesting though, because I would have, right? Like, you kind of would have expected linebacker at minimum two this class because
I wanted two
last year was
linebackers.
well, last year was just Nesta. And I agree. Like I saw some pictures, and Nesta looks great, and I think I think he probably played Mike or Will. He seemed so good in high school as a blitzer, and Oklahoma likes to blitz so much. I think you kind of well, they bring it with both, right? It's pretty interchangeable. But I could see him playing either spot, I suppose. But he seems like maybe a bit more of a Will from a physical standpoint. Yeah, it's would have expected. I would have expected them to sign more. They've got I want to call it like a loaded linebacker room. They got a number of players. I think maybe I think I know some folks have wondered like if a guy like Lewis Carter might transfer, just given again the
Right.
number of players Oklahoma has at linebacker. But it's surprising that they didn't take another.
I kind of wish either Sambo or Lewis Carter were redshirted last year, so to space them out a little bit because they're all going to go into their next year's juniors along with Kobe and Kanik and Kip Lewis. So we got 5 linebackers who are juniors. I kind of wish somebody had redshirted.
Agreed. I did not understand the thought process behind playing. A year ago, playing both Sammy and Lewis essentially only on special teams, but you burned their red shirt, right? I didn't why wouldn't you just do with one of them? And then this year, I didn't understand. I know there's a lot of strong feelings about Kanik in one way or the other. I didn't understand why this year you would play him on every special teams unit and again burn his red shirt when you could have set him down and said, all right, like let's really just put you at a position, focus you there, and see if in a year you can be make a run at a spot. That one I was surprised because Brent has in the past, I think multiple times while he was at Clemson, he took kids that were I don't think Skalski was one of them. Maybe he was. Maybe he was the guy that, like as a junior, they grabbed him and said, hey, you're going to be the backup this year. We want to redshirt you and have you come back and have essentially 2 years where you can compete to be the guy. And then end up being so. Them not doing it this year, maybe it just shows football's in a different spot. I don't know.
Yeah, and I can see them signing 3 or 4 linebackers in 26. The early returns on 2026 are very positive. They've had a number of really quality guys come in for visits for games. They're recruiting a guy who just has a great linebacker name. He's from Ohio. His brother signed with Brent and Clemson, so there's a family connection there. And if you can sign a linebacker named Storm Miller, I think you're just heading in the right direction. So he's got a great linebacker name. But they've been bringing in some. There's some better linebackers in Texas, I think, as well. So I think it'll be fine. But I am surprised that we didn't get at least one big name, and I really would like. I'd like for them in January see if they could find a developmental linebacker, right? Someone who just needs a couple of years to add some weight, and then when all of these guys have left, that group of Samo, Kanik, all these guys have matriculated out of OU in whatever format that means, that you have like another name. I do know they like Owen Heineke as the walk-on at linebacker, and I don't. And if they could ever put some weight on him, Taylor Heim has all kinds of interesting, potential maybe at linebacker as well, just athletic range and all that. But
I know I've said this a bunch, like in our little thing on the site, but like to me, tight end.
I know
it's going to go to assistant. His best film in high school was with the ball in his hands as a playmaker, right? And whether that was picking balls off and then taking them back, when he had him at safety, or just essentially as a dual threat quarterback, taking off running, like running the ball. And it's like, okay, you're going into year 3, 6'6", 225 or whatever it is, and you are like 5th on the linebacker depth chart, and you're the same class as a lot of – just, I would say move that kid to tight end, see if you can get him 6'6", 245 and throw him the ball, let him play in space.
Yeah. So again, even reducing to the linebacker room a little bit more. So I can't believe they can't find a linebacker in January recruiting that couldn't be, if he was a development guy, like, he's long, he's rangy, he needs to put on weight. No problem, right? We got 2 years to develop him up. So I'd like to see that in January recruiting, if at all possible. So you kind of answered this with your incomplete grade, but if you were to give it a letter grade, however you want to factor in quality and quantity and whatever measurements, if you were to give this a letter grade, and let's just say, for the sake of comparison, last year's class was like an A or an A minus, what would you give this year's class? It's the dreaded. I'm giving you making you do the dreaded draft grade time, right after the draft, right? The stupid grade the NFL draft grades that they make the analysts do. So I'm making you do that, where it's like, it's an A, and you're like, well,
I do despise that, and in some ways, I even just. It's like I said this the other day. Like I'm kind of tired of everyone when a guy hits the transfer portal and everybody talks about how talented he is, and he's a former 5-star. I honestly feel like when
that should be like reset, right? It should be reset. Like after you're in college 2 years,
it shouldn't just
it should be
reset.
erased. It should be erased.
It shouldn't even be reset. It should be a sign. It should be like the Scarlet Letter, not for that kid, for all the people saying that. What you're saying is, I was so bad at evaluating. I thought this guy was a potential first-round draft pick, game changer, program changer, but I'm so bad at what I do in terms of projecting that out, or we were so wrong that he's clearly not. Like I get, like we said this in a little text yesterday, and it was like, I hear like the scoop guys, all these, everybody in media around Oklahoma talk about Jackson Arnold, and I don't want to like turn this into a crapping on him thing, because he seems like a fantastic kid. I'm not crapping on him as a player, but I hear him like, oh, he's super talented. And I was like, I said, I'm just scratching my head and being like, okay, but I hear people say that. What does that mean? Because if I stack him up to just the rest of the SEC quarterbacks, like I said, he is in the bottom quartile in terms of height, weight, speed, arm strength, agility, like the physical traits and the physical measurables. 6'1", 210, small, right? He's not Sellers. He's not 6'4", 240 and running through people.
He's not
right?
Nico. He's not Jackson Dart.
6'6", 230.
He's not Jackson Dart. He's not Sellers.
No, he's not.
Yeah.
He's not Nussmeier in terms of like arm talent, right? Like and so like, what do you guys mean by that? Like I hear that, and it's like, it's just, and it's kind of the same thing. It's like, oh, who won the draft? And it's like, well, I mean, who actually met their needs And maybe that's kind of what, in some ways, high school recruiting is turning into. I think before the portal was such a big deal, and now that's been so normalized where I think when it first started from a transfer perspective, you would look at the kids going to the transfer portal and you would say, okay, those are kids that have failed at universities and they're trying to find a place to play. You don't say that anymore. Now you say, like, okay, there's probably a bunch of kids in there that are actually really good. They were playing at MAC schools, or they may have even been playing at other Power Five schools, but they realize there's a market out there. Somebody's willing to pay them a ton of money, or they fit another scheme better. And so it's a supplement. And so I kind of would change how I view the recruiting class and say, okay, rather than looking at this on even footing, I look at every class the same way. Who signed the most talent? It's now, okay, who maybe fit some of their needs the best. So
Okay.
I would
How
probably
do you think OU did needs wise then?
I would say probably in the neighborhood of like a B plus.
Okay, I think
Right.
that's fair.
And what I'd say is, like, I wish they would have signed Mills, the kid from Florida, because he
Yep.
was in that
Yep.
6'1", 6'1.5". I think where Oklahoma really struggled this past year, and it was obvious, right? Like super obvious when you could get any all 22 and look at it. Oklahoma was so small effectively, even though they're fast at wide receiver. In the SEC, again, bigger, longer, better athletes on the outside. Teams walked their corners up and got in Oklahoma's receivers' faces, and they just said, we will bully you, and we're not worried about you beating us, because by the time you get anybody by us, we're going to get to your quarterback. It's like NFL style, right?
Yeah.
Well, so there's two ways we can go about helping here. We can go get some edge guys at tackle that can hold up against basically anybody you toss out there. And I think Foji's a potential, he's got first round type ability down the line, and we know Fasusi does, right? Or it appears to. I don't want to say we know, because we do not know.
The raw
assume.
clay's there. The raw clay is there,
Yeah,
right?
we assume both. You look at both those guys, and it's like, okay, again, like, what do you need from an edge, tackle perspective? I need 6'5" to 6'6", 6'7". I need a guy that's agile, can move his feet. I need a guy that can bend at the waist, right? I need somebody that's got some body control. It's not sloppy. You know what I mean? Can
Yeah.
play
Yeah.
behind their pads and play under control and bring whatever power they have, right? And will develop power through time. Okay, got that with those guys. What do I also need? I need some guys outside at receiver that are bigger, longer, are more physical, can hold up. Those corners are a little bit more worried. I think we saw it even in the Tennessee game. Such a good example when Nick Anderson did play. It was the first time you walked. Every time he was out there, Tennessee's corner was like 8 to 10 yards off, because they're like, all right, I don't want to get in this guy's face, because he's a big physical guy.
He might run over me. He might run over me and go run
Well,
past
isn't even
me.
just that, like, because Oklahoma with the big wide splits, like, one of those, like, I think one of their option routes is a slant. Okay, he gets inside of me, you're sunk. Because he's got that big body, he's going to run through your arm tackle, and you see it with Tennessee a lot. You watch their highlights; they're oftentimes hitting slants up the seam for touchdowns with those big wide receivers. And so it's like, all right, I'm going to play off here. So having Manny Choice and Elijah Thomas, 6'1", 190, 6'4", 205, you're getting some bigger guys on the outside where corners are going to go, okay, like, we're going to give them, we're not going to get up there. We don't want to get beat right away. Particularly don't want to give up the inside right away to one of these guys. I'm worried about that. So I think they met some needs there. I think where it would have been an A is if you'd have said, okay, they went, you got, I think who's going to be a future elite pass rusher, in Okoye, right? You got him last year, and you want to get like multiple guys every year along the defensive front. And I do think Trent Wilson and and the kid from Weatherford, right? I think they're
Nixon.
I think they've got that potential and could beat those guys.
But you have to hit on both of them, right? You can't.
It's exactly. So, like, that's the whole thing, right? Like, where I think Oklahoma did so good on the offensive line, and there's like, whatever that stat is, like, somebody ran it a year or two ago where it was, something like 75 or 80% of 5-stars are drafted. Okay. So, like, you've got a really high probability, and then you get like 4 stars inside the top, whatever, 150, 50% of those guys are drafted at some point. Okay. Well, Oklahoma needs a tackle. You signed 2 guys that fit close to that 5-star bill. The probability says one of those 2 is going to be a high-level player that goes and plays in the NFL. Maybe both of them, and you hope for both. But because you signed two, probability says you'll hit one.
Right.
I wish they would have signed two defensive ends, two defensive tackles, where it's okay, probability says you're likely to hit both. I think Trent Wilson will play early. I think he'll play as a freshman. He doesn't look like a freshman. At all, right? It would not shock me to see that kid come in and they play right behind Grayson Halton right away. And when Halton leaves and goes to the NFL, he's there. But, as we've seen,
you never know.
You never know.
So, okay. Well, Caleb, that's an hour. I think I've taken up enough of your time. I really appreciate you coming on with me and talking about this recruiting class, so everyone doesn't have to listen to me drone on for an hour just by myself talking. So, always respect your opinions and what I like is you're always consistent with them. You're not flip flopping on stuff. If you like a guy, you like the guy for the consistent reasons. If you're any long-time listeners of our pod know, when Kayla and I have been talking about O-line recruiting for the longest time, we've always talking about measurables. At defensive end, it's always measurables. Quarterback, it's measurables. And then we'll talk about safeties and linebackers. Like, well, I gotta have a guy who can smartly diagnose stuff, right? You gotta have the fastest guy at linebacker who's constantly overrunning the play isn't doing you any good. But but at some positions, you can't fake it. You've got to have the guy with the measurables you need. And I think Trent Wilson was maybe the best 3 technique in the country this year. He was just fantastic.
Yeah,
I agree. He's not Justice Terry. He's not Elijah Griffin. I think those are the only guys that are legitimately, have higher ceilings than him. But I mean, we think about Grayson Halton, like his junior year, I think like he's finally the right height, and size, right, to really make a difference. And we saw it this year. He played really well this year. Well, Trent Wilson's coming in at that size and height. I mean, he's coming in like, Grayson was like a D end in high school, and he was a little bit, like an outside guy. He was 6'2", like 255, 260. But that's what Grayson Halton was when OU signed him. And he was like 275 a freshman. He was like 280 as a sophomore. And this year he's finally 290, and he's making plays all over the field. Well, Trent Wilson's like 6'2", 290 right now. I mean, he's, Brent says he looks like he's 40 years old, which I think is funny. I'm not quite sure he's in the Samaje Perine, looked like he was 35 and looked like he was 35. And, I remember someone who met Samaje thought he was a recruit's dad the first time he saw him on campus. He's like, hey, who's that guy's dad? He's like, no, that's our new running back. So, Trent's apparently in that same world, and he comes from that Maryland area where just lots of talent, high aggregated talent. So, he's played really well. So I think I think you're right. He's going to be in the rotation because it's going to be like, he's only going to be here 3 years. We just might as well just get the reps in and get him going, because he's going to be the guy to help support Stone and Jackson in their 3rd year. So we might as well get him ready this year. But I gave grades just because, that's kind of one of those things we do is, when you're writing about recruiting. And I gave it like a B plus quality quantity. I think quality wise, it's a B plus class, because I think of the 18 guys signed, I would say I think there's about 10 or 11 that I think are top 150 type guys. The 3 offensive linemen, Nixon, Trent Wilson, the 2 receivers. I think Amarian Robinson fits in that category too. We didn't talk about him, and I just love his game at safety. I think Guillory and Haynes also sort of fit in that category as well. I think there's a chance that Trene Washington may just end up being a big receiver for OU, that he fits that. They may just decide that he's a big receiver. That it's not worth our time kind of making him a tight end. If you get the right tight ends in, you can just turn around and just tell Trene Washington, just be a receiver. And he can easily be a big receiver in the mold you're talking about with his frame and athleticism. So
yeah, he's the one guy, like you look at the class, and what I like about it is it's kind of a height, weight, speed class in some regards. Marion Robinson, 6 foot, 185 pounds, but it's not huge for a safety, but he is maybe the fastest safety in the country. And he's also one of the guys, like, again, you watch this film and like in the football IQ's there.
Yeah,
he's that guy. And
a little Billy Bowman like you could see him doing some of the same things Bowman was doing in terms of reading,
I think
intercepting.
he's just definitely more fluid than Billy. Like Billy's so muscled up, kind of muscled
Yeah,
down, right?
exactly. He's a little
Yeah.
longer.
O'Marion, like he's a stud, right? But like, I mean, every DB they sign's over 6 foot. All the corners and safeties are they're 6'2", 6'1". Shield Knight, I guess, would be the other guy that maybe doesn't quite fit the height, weight, speed. But for me, like Washington, I'm interested in him. He's the one guy where I say he's either a stretch and a reach for the class, and maybe they shouldn't have taken him, or it's on him if he just puts the time in the weight room and shows up and is that guy physically that because in today's world, like the way tight ends are played, flexed so much and just as a move guy, and even you don't have to be who was Kyle Brady. If
Yeah,
anybody
yeah,
remembers,
yeah.
like you don't have to be Kyle Brady.
6'7", 280, basically a tackle.
A neck like this on him, right? Like it's just because tight ends are used differently. I've always thought like the best high end comp for Trene I could think of was Evan Ingram, tight end that played at Ole Miss and then drafted by the Giants. 6'3", 240 or somewhere in that neighborhood.
And so with the Jags, right? Still collecting an NFL paycheck, right?
Oh, he's really good. Like he's a very good player. But again, he is that. You put him in line some, and he's going to climb to a backer. He's fine blocking linebackers and safeties, right? And the same thing, right? Defensive ends now aren't like. I'm trying to think of the defensive end from the Penn State teams, and then Brown. They're not 6'6", 285, right? And just
Courtney Brown.
Courtney Brown, yeah, they are not that as well. So to me, though, it's about him, right? Does he show up to campus and is he 6'4" or 6'3" and 225, 230 pounds? And you can clearly tell he's put the work in the weight room, training and eating and doing those things to be that guy? Or does he show up and he's just a skinny guy that you're like, okay, this is going to take 3 or 4 years of us having to do a bunch of work and try to force this down you? Does he take ownership, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Does he take ownership of his future now and put that work in? Or is he a guy that, he's going to have Oklahoma hold his hand to get him to do that? And if that's the case, I'll be honest, in today's version of college football, I don't know if those guys can make it, because we've just entered into this
The roster churn is just so aggressive, right? I mean, the early sun.
The reality is, you got to pay the guys so much. Now these guys are all earning money.
Yes.
And so it's this like, hey, I'm having to allocate a bunch of money to you, but I can't put you on the field for another 2 years. But like, if I go over here and get this guy right now, I'll give him the same amount of money and he can play right now.
Yeah, it's I would say the signs, the Carl Albert guys, Rob's discipline and what he did to make himself a factor is a positive sign, right? Like that comes from, like, I think that comes from the school he's at and kind of obviously himself internally. But if I'm Trene, I'm talking to Rob. Rob's like, you need to hit it, put 20 pounds on, and then you can see the field, man, because they got no one else here. There's a void here. You hit it just like me, you could be on the field. So I think Trene Washington is one of those guys. Again, also Shield Knight. What does he do? I think he does have two-way potential as well, because I think the guy he's a physical, tough football player. I'm not in any question, no questions about his effort and his motor at all, right? Like, you told me he's like a special teams demon. I'm like, zero doubt about that, right? If he can stay healthy, because he's had a knee problem, and then he broke his leg and broke his leg in the playoffs. So I worry a little bit about Shield Knight, a little bit about the wear and tear on his body, because he had the knee injury and then breaking a leg. So I don't know. Maybe it's just the PTSD we had about our team this fall with the injury report having 12 starters out. Everyone's like, is it really that bad? I'm like, guys, preseason, the guys we thought that were really going to help us, we're missing 33% of them. I mean, that's it's I mean, look at the to ramble about. You look at the Detroit Lions last night. I mean, they're down like 5 defensive starters, and the defense that was playing great is now giving up like 30 points a game. I mean, they're scoring over 30, so they're winning, but their defense is just. I mean, it's been ravaged. So and they're giving up points. You can just tell that it's not the same defense.
No, and it's one of those deals, right? You play in this league or in this world now, and it's like you look at the 49ers, right? In the Super Bowl, and you come out this year, and it's like, okay, your running back's hurt, your left tackle's hurt, your quarterback's hurt, these guys are hurt. Okay, now you're not going to make the playoffs. You went from like should have won the Super Bowl if you weren't competing against a bunch of referees as well. I kid, but I don't kid. And to now you're in this spot where like you won't make the playoffs, and it's just it's like kind of that way with Oklahoma this year, where you look at it and you're like, okay, well, you went from like
the best wide receiver room in the SEC potentially, deepest wide receiver, and then August 5th, Gibson goes down. And then Farouk and Anderson are just whatever that's going on with them. And then, and then Farouk finally gets healthy and he makes a huge play, first play of the game. And then he's hurt for the rest of the year. It's just, and then we knew, you and I both knew OU needed like everything to be perfect O-line wise, right? Everything to go right.
Yes.
We need everything to go right. And then Troy Everett hurts his knee right before the spring game, and all of a sudden it's like, okay. And then Hatchett tears his bicep. It's like, okay. And then you're like, and then Taylor has been hurt all year. And then Sexton is moving position by position. And it's like, we needed everything to go right. Because this is the year where Bill's and Lincoln Riley's recruiting mistakes were going to come back to bite us. And then we made some bad portal choices, in which we could have survived any of these problems, maybe if we hadn't had then 4 other guys get hurt. It was like we could have perhaps eked through if we could have, if you had started Sexton and Taylor at right tackle, at left tackle and right tackle all season long, and you'd had Everett at center all season long, you probably could have mucked through this season in okay shape, right? I mean, maybe. But when those pieces started falling off, there's just like, well, there's no one else behind, man. That's because there is nobody left from 2020, 2021, and with Sexton and Taylor hurt, 2022 is also gone. You can't survive your 3 classes of offensive linemen being not contributing. I mean, I don't know that he would have how much would it help, but Andrew Rame should have come back, as an example of a guy making a bad business decision.
Oh my God, yeah. He's on a practice. Is he on a practice squad?
I don't think he is.
So I mean,
yeah.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah. So
because Caleb, even if he was on a practice squad, you're still going to make more money in the NIL world.
Well, yeah. If he said I could come back and he's like, I'd like to play guard, we'd have been like, sure, no problem. Well,
right.
Let's transition you to guard, and then you would have had a veteran guard next to. Which would have solved the whole Sexton flip-flopping problem and just left him at left tackle. And then that would have been a solid foundation. And then, when Howland Ozetta got better, you could have put those guys, everything that had to go right for it to work, and everything went completely wrong. So
completely wrong.
Well, it is. It's like, stay healthy on the offensive line, fail, wide receiver group excel and play up to their ability, fail. We were, it's not. I think he's played badly, but he's also been put in stupid positions by our offensive coordinators. I mean, Bauer Sharp, we were told, was playing really well. That's been, the struggle bus. And then the new offensive coordinator we were hoping was going to do all of these different things, and he was a complete fail. So it's like. And all the while, we put out our best defense in 15 years. So it's a little. And we saw the one game where the offense, contributed to the defense.
Just didn't kill themselves.
Just didn't kill themselves. And we saw what that actually looked like. So, all right, guys. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We really appreciate it. Caleb, once again, thanks so much for joining us. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Don't forget to leave a rating. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click subscribe and give me a thumbs up. And again, please visit the Patreon site, patreon.com/Sooners360817 to support this podcast. The Patreon site directly keeps this podcast free for everyone. Appreciate it. We'll be back with more content this week. Bye-bye.